Say you've created your world space, and as you look around, there's nothing in the distance. You can't see further than a few cells, and that's because you haven't generated LOD. And you can see the same thing in-game. You can't see very far in the distance, and if you move forwards to a point where you can see it, then there's a very obvious pop-in. And the borders are very straight, and you can't even see everything of the entire island. Now there's two ways to fix this. One is to use a combination of the Creation Kit and Oscape to generate your LOD. However, as far as I know, that's not possible with the 64-bit Creation Kit, and it's a rather cumbersome process. The second option is to use xLODGen, which is a tool used to generate LOD. It's an almost one-click solution, and it's also the basis for LOD, which is what some people may be more familiar with. So first up, I'm going to show you how to install xLODGen and its requirements. If you're already familiar with xLODGen or you've already got it installed, then you can skip past this part, and I'll provide a link for doing so. Now you'll need two parts to xLODGen. The first one available here, I'll put a link to that in the description, and you can click on either of these links, or whichever one's there when you get there, and it leads you to a 7-zip file. You download that. I've already done so, but you download that, you copy it somewhere useful. I have a separate mod tools folder where I like to put it. You unzip it, and I'm just reorganizing things now. But you can either rename the executable to whichever game you're generating LOD for, or you can run it with an argument. Now I've added it here as an executable in Mod Organizer, so it can actually see my ESP. If you have your ESP loose in the data folder, you don't need to do that. Now there's another part you'll need, which is vanilla tree billboards. This is only available from the TS5 LODGen page. So you scroll down, you head to the files section, and you install vanilla tree billboards like you would any other mod. Either Mod Organizer, Nexus Mod Manager, Vortex, or Rybash. And as you can see down here, I've already gone ahead and installed it. The reason you need vanilla tree billboards is so that xLODGen can compile the Atlas texture, which is basically a large texture that shows what every tree looks like from the side. Then the actual LOD files that it generates point to that texture and tell the game to display this part of the texture at this point in the game. The reason xLODGen does it this way rather than just taking the vanilla Atlas texture is so that tree overhaul creators can include their own billboards, and then your LOD for trees will still match the trees you see up close. So if you now run xLODGen and you wait a little bit for it to load up, then you'll notice that the world space we were working with is not actually available, even though, as you can see, it did load the ESP. Now the reason for that is because we don't have an LOD settings file. Now luckily Bethesda have included an LOD settings file for every world space in their game. You can find this in the Meshes 0 BSA, or for the regular Skyrim in meshes.bsa, and when you extract that you'll find the LOD settings folder. You open that up, you copy tamriel.lod. Now you either go into your mod or into your data folder, and if LOD settings folder does not exist yet, you create a new folder, rename it LOD settings, you open it up, paste tamriel.lod, and you rename it to the editor ID of your world space, which in my case is 000_tutorial island. Now if we then close xLODGen and run it again, you should see the world space in the list. So we check it, uncheck Tamriel, and there are three different kinds of LOD. There's Objects LOD, there's Trees LOD, and Terrain LOD. And Terrain LOD has separate quality settings for each level of detail, so you'll need to set those individually. Now, there are certain settings that are recommended by the author of xLODGen to start with, and I've set those here. You can find them on the download page, or you can just copy what you see here. I find these are more than sufficient. However, you can play around with them if you like to see if you see any difference in performance or quality. Now, once you've set those, you can click on the generate button and you'll have to wait for the process to complete. This can take longer or shorter depending on how quick your computer is and how big your world space is, but in my case it took about 2 minutes. So let's skip ahead to that. And as you can see by the message in the bottom, it's done. So we can now close xLODGen. And in my case I have to go into the override folder, normally your data folder. Within meshes, terrain, and then the editor ID of your world space, you can find the terrain meshes. So if you open those in nifscope, you can see the process worked, and you've got the water plane, a much lower detail version of your terrain. And the textures are a bit blurred, but it doesn't really matter because you're seeing it from a distance. Now this is the 4 level detail. And if we close it and open, for example, the 32 level, you can see everything's much more zoomed out. And where previously was a pretty sizable chunk, it's now very small. Now you've also got the object LOD. And if we open those, the BTO files, within nifscope, you can see it's indeed a much lower detail version of the normal static objects. If you open another one, you can see the tower that was connected to a stair, and these are all patched together to form the object LOD. Now the trees LOD you can't really open in nifscope because it's not an actual mesh. Now if we go slightly higher up to the textures folder, terrain, and then again the editor ID of your world space, you're going to see all the different textures that were generated by xLODGen. And in the trees folder, you can see the atlas texture that was generated by xLODGen from all the different tree billboards. And you have a similar texture for the object LOD. And these are really the only 2 things that comprise your LOD. Now, there is one other thing you will have to include in order for your LOD to display properly for users of your mod: the LOD settings file that corresponds with your world space. I'll put a link in the description that shows what happens if you don't. But now that we're done, let's go in game and test it. And as you can see, it's visible from a distance. And as we get closer and closer, there is a bit of a pop-in, but it's not nearly as bad as it was before. You can see further than a few cells. In other words, you've successfully generated LOD for your world space.